All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday. We are here with a fantastic panel. Very excited to talk about what the first 90 days of a new product manager might look like. A brief roadmap on how to kind of navigate a new team and or a new product. Obviously, with the current state of affairs, we are seeing turnover, but we're also seeing people move to new positions and thankfully find new jobs. So we thought this would be a great topic to kind of dive into a little bit and hear from some experts who have done this themselves in the past and hopefully give all of you some good ideas of what to expect. So as a brief reminder, if this is your first time joining one of our webinars, we are the Product Stack. The Product Stack is a group of like-minded folks across these three organizations: Pivotal Tracker, Jama Software, and Product Plan. We've kind of formed a group, is it 3 years ago now? Maybe two, I think it's three. Realizing that we have a lot of the same customers and we wanted to provide more value to them outside of just our products, and we thought doing some live events and webinars was a great way to do that. You can always follow up with additional conversations. If you go to theproductstack.com, we have a link there to our Slack channel. We also have a new newsletter that you can subscribe to, and all of our past webinars and events the videos are posted there, so you can always stay in touch that way. Quick introduction for me: I'm Kevin Steigerwald. I'm one of the co-founders, like I mentioned, of the Product Stack. Currently Director of Product Design at Jama Software, and happy to be moderating this conversation. But if you hear from me too much, someone ping me. So I want to make sure we're getting our fantastic panel talking. And so lots of good insights we have today. I'm going to let each of you introduce yourself briefly. So Roxanne, kick it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roxanne Mustafa. I am a design lead for Pivotal Tracker and now VMware. I've worked for many years as a consultant, working alongside a lot of different types of organizations as a product designer and a senior designer and a design lead. And before that, I have experience in design agencies and startups. So I'm really happy to be here with you all from New York City.
Great, right on, thanks. Ambika?
Hi, I'm Ambika Sogal. I'm a product manager at Aruba HPE. I've been in various product development roles, switched from roles from business analyst to product owner to product manager. Really glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks. And then Jim.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone here. My name is Jim Femick, and I'm one of the founders of Product Plan, and I've been in product management and new product development for a couple of decades now, and got my start actually with a company that later went on to create this product that we're using today, which is GoToWebinar. And I actually wrote the product requirements for this product. And I've had the fortune of experiencing startups at the very early stage, going all the way through to becoming billion-dollar companies, including the last company that I was at before Product Plan was called Appfolio, which is a B2B SaaS company that went from very early stages of being that startup, and I was part of the startup team there, to an IPO, and then went on to start Product Plan. And we are able to talk with thousands of product managers all over the world to talk about their challenges. And our product roadmap software is used by a variety of companies to communicate the strategy of what they're building. And we're able to talk with product managers about such topics as what to do when you first start a product management job. And so I'm really excited to be on the panel today talking about all those topics.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Yeah, I think we've got a great range of experience and leadership here to really help navigate this conversation. So excited to have you all. As a quick agenda, and then we'll kind of just dive right in. When we ask for signups to the event, everyone gets to submit a question, and we got lots of questions around, if I'm just switching a role at my current company, will this still apply to me? So I'd like to first kind of walk through a brief overview from my personal experience of what it was like joining a new company, and also what it was like kind of just transitioning to a new role at a company. And I think you'll see that everything that we're talking about today can absolutely be applied just when viewed through the correct lens. Then we've kind of divided up our areas of focus here into people, strategy, tools, and process. So we'll walk through some of the main things that you should be doing in each of those areas. By no means is it an exhaustive list, but hopefully it gets some of the right conversation going. And then, as always with our webinars, we love to turn it over for live Q&A at the end. Each of these sections is really, populated by the questions that you have all submitted ahead of time. But as a reminder, through the GoToWebinar interface, there is a way to submit questions as well. We love getting those. We have a couple folks behind the scenes who can answer some of those live. Additionally, they will be collecting some that feel like they're great for discussion, and we'll bring those back during the live Q&A portion at the end. So definitely feel free to add in some questions as we go. Great, so that was a little bit about us. Before we get started, we always like to learn a little more about our audience. We currently have over 400 attendees. So we would love to know, why are you joining us today? And I'm gonna launch a poll here. So this screen should swap out in a second. Take a quick second and just give us a little visibility into what brought you here. Hopefully this is launching. There we go. All right, so am I still sharing my screen? You guys still see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep, great, okay. So yeah, I think, I don't know if the results are up here because of the way my screen is being shared, but we've got 34, I guess I gotta hit share results. I'll share them for everybody. 34% said you've recently started a new job, 22% you're looking, and 10% is about to start. So it looks like a pretty healthy mix of folks right in that sweet spot of our conversation. What's interesting to me, and I think this will be a great aspect for Jim on the call, is I'm onboarding a new PM. Jim has done a lot as a co-founder and leader of companies to kind of help bring on new individuals. So I think a lot of his experience there will be fantastic for us. So very, very excited to have all of you here with us. We have another poll coming up in a second. But I do, like I mentioned, want to get into real briefly just some of the differences of tactics between joining a new company versus joining a new role. And so when you're joining a new company, I think back to when I first started in software, really. I got my start in advertising. I was an art director. And after doing that for about 6 years, I made the transition into software, joined a startup here in Portland as the first designer on the team, which I came to learn also meant I was kind of the first product manager. We didn't have a product manager, and everyone was looking to me to kind of fill that role before I even knew what that role really meant. So I think all the things I learned are definitely applicable. For me, the things that were really important about joining a new company that you can apply to everything that we learn about today center around these 3 bullets of building trust, demonstrating your knowledge, and developing empathy. So when you want to build trust, it's very important at a new company that you're not there to just rock the boat. I think also depending on what your role is, but as a product manager, a lot of people, specifically your delivery team, look to you as a leader. And if you're in there to shake things up right away before you even understand the entire situation, where are we with our strategy, where are we with our product, what's working, what's not working, folks can get a little disenchanted and a little nervous. So I think it's important that you be honest about what you don't know. I think people definitely appreciate that. You want to ask questions with earnest. Don't necessarily come across as accusatory or challenging. When it comes to demonstrating knowledge, you want to find ways to contribute early by focusing on your skill set. So for me, when I came in as a designer, I looked for every opportunity I could with the engineering team just to make small tweaks, recommendations, to help them understand these are the areas of knowledge I bring. When you run into a blocker, I can be there to help you. And I think that was a great way to just start to build some of those early foundational relationships that led to greater things down the road. And then developing empathy, talk to customers, talk to customer support teams. This is something you should be doing all of the time. So probably nothing new here, but definitely when you're brand new to a company, this should be part of your roadmap. And we'll dig into this a little more with the panel. When I started at the first company I joined, it was really important to me for those first couple of weeks. I joined every customer support call that I could. And so whether they were onboarding a new customer or trying to close a deal, even just riding sidecar in silence allowed me to hear directly from the customer what are the pain points they had, where are they being blocked, and that helped both then fill in my gaps in knowledge and build new trust. When starting a new role, so if you're switching roles within an existing company, coincidentally, the high-level lessons I think are the same: building trust, demonstrating knowledge, and developing empathy. The difference here is how you apply your skill sets through those. And so, for me personally, I founded a company. We got acquired, and we got acquired by JAMA, where I am at today. And so for the first couple months, I was brought in as just a product manager. It was my job to kind of bring the integration of our two products to market. And so that was the role and expectation everyone had of me as a product manager. Shortly after that, I was promoted to VP of product. And then just recently, I made the decision to transition back to my main skill set of being on the design team. And so going through those different positions really changed people's perceptions of me. They knew me as a product manager, or they knew me as executive senior leadership, and maybe not someone who can get down into the weeds, is willing to get into the weeds, and can actually deliver code and things like that. And so you still need to build trust. You have to be open-minded. You have to be prepared to let go of any preconceived notions you have based on your previous position. And also, you have to expect that people are going to have preconceived notions of you. And so, I see this as oftentimes people from customer support or account management, they end up in product, and they are often seen a very different side of the process, right? That they're more face-to-face with customers on a daily basis. And when they get into product management, they're maybe not as aware of all the issues that we constantly face, and of dealing with engineering defects and issues of bringing releases to market. And so I think there's a lot that can be forged there by building the right trust. It's the same with demonstrating your knowledge. Again, it's very important to share your expertise. You don't want to force this. So for me personally, it was helping people realize, again, I have these skill sets as a designer. I have built products before. I have brought them to market. I'm not just a manager of people. And so find those early examples of ways you can bring that to knowledge, and then develop empathy here. Most likely you have some empathy for the customer already. Again, back to my first point, you should always be talking to customers. But the real work to do here when you're starting a new role is about developing empathy with your team, getting a better understanding, and kind of breaking down any of those pre-existing beliefs that you may share or have. You want to understand what are their challenges, how do you help, how do you contribute to that, etc. So I don't know if the panel wants to add anything specifically here before we jump into our main sections, but that's kind of the way that I see. We had a lot of questions from folks asking if this content was going to be relevant to them. I think everything we talk about from this point on can easily be applied to either of these two scenarios. Does everyone agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good overview, Kevin. I do want to reiterate something you've mentioned, which is about being open-minded, about listening, about asking a lot of questions, and I think that's really essential for PMs coming into a new role or transitioning from a different role into a product management role. And there's always that instinct to want to jump in and immediately provide value. And that can be challenging for product managers sometimes if they come in and try to push a little too hard at the very, very beginning. And so I usually recommend for that first 30 days or even longer, sit back, ask a lot of questions, and form your own opinion.
I think I wanted to add also that, as you called out, Kevin, there's similarity, a lot of overlap in thinking about a new role within a company versus a completely new company. There is affinity and overlap in what we sort of need to do to onboard and learn about the domain. But where there's more affinity is when you're transitioning within a company and there's a transition in the role. And I think that's a baseline, a foundation, that affinity within the company, those values that you may already know. But I think what you're calling out is there's still a level of work to be done on building new empathy and foundation with the new team.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll call out is, when you switch to a new role within a company, you have to be aware of the responsibilities that role brings and kind of tailor your mindset to think a little differently. And not just assume, yeah, I've been here a long time and we know everything.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's you don't want to bring too much of your own existing stuff like that. That's great. Okay, well, I'm excited to hear for more of the panel. So let's jump to that. I think the last poll we'll ask here is going to help shape some of the conversation. And so we want to again hear from the audience here on what have you found to be the most challenging when joining a new team, and this will help our panelists dig into a little bit here. So hopefully that is launching for you. Did it close instantly? All right, sharing my results. Okay, hopefully you can see that. But we were 44% planning my roadmap, 37% learning product history from my team, and then a couple sprinklings here and there about shipping, connecting with customers, and understanding the tech stack. So all kind of aligns with the conversation we'll be having. We will jump into our conversation then. So first 90 days, let's talk about people. Who are the people you should be talking to? What are the conversations you should be having? What does that really look like? We've built out kind of an example of roadmap here. This is really just a visual aid to guide us through this conversation. Again, by no means an exhaustive list here. I believe we'll be having this as a template that we can share out at the end of this as well too. But I want to know, and maybe Roxanne, I'll start with you. But as you are starting at a new company or in a new role, who are the people you're reaching out to first? And what does that look like, day 1 versus day 30? How are you transitioning between the folks that you want to speak with?
Yeah, this webinar and this topic is very timely for me. I moved from one part of our organization at the former company Pivotal, the consultancy side, to the Pivotal Tracker team. So I was shifting my role. And then recently we were acquired and our integration is complete. So now we are part of a larger org called VMware. And I'm now collaborating with different people across what we call strategy groups to kind of figure out what the new programs might be, the net new programs, and while some of the other programs are sort of evolving. And I'm experiencing this on multiple levels. The first thing that I did when I joined the Tracker team is made sure, because I was joining a team and my role was changing, was I made sure I talked to the team. And as a design lead, the first point of contact are the product managers and the product owners. If I was a product manager, I would be talking to the product owners. And I would set up those one-on-ones, 30-minute sessions, being mindful of their time, getting the lay of the land, taking active notes. And I went into Miro board and I started to create like a mind map or even like a visualization of what I was hearing in my notes as I was talking to different people from different roles and different perspectives. The interesting thing about working across the organization, which is kind of like a new job in a way with VMware, is taking notes of the people that get name dropped in each of these meetings, because I'm learning about new people, new roles, new functions. So I kind of think of it as like spheres of influence. I reached out to my immediate sphere of influence across a new program that was being defined or sort of in conversations. And then I would make avid notes of who they're name dropping, who the product owners are, who the key stakeholders are. And then at the end of the session, I would ask them, the people that I'm talking to in these one-on-ones, who should I talk to next? Who should I talk to if I want to understand what state the code base is in, or what the tech stack is, or if there are any customer journeys I could learn from? So it's really kind of, again, like a similar evolution, a similar sort of process, but different, because in one case, I do know who the players are for the most part. In the other case, they're sort of net new players. And it's really taking avid notes so that I'm not asking the basic questions during these one-on-ones. I'm getting to the more substantive product-oriented stuff.
Yep, great. And I really like that idea of the spheres of influence. And I think we all kind of chatted about that before this of, don't just start with a department or an individual team, but really look at all the different inputs that come into it. So you're getting a more 360 view from the beginning, and it kind of grows outward from there to higher levels. So I think that's great. We do have a question, and Ambika, I'll direct this to you. A question that came in from a viewer of what happens though if you're roped into technical meetings, maybe a little earlier in the process before you've gotten your full bearings and you don't have as much technical knowledge as you would like to have, or maybe just in your role need to have. Any experience in how to navigate those types of conversations with people?
I mean, you have to listen and again, play your newcomer card. Ask the very fundamental questions of why are we doing this? What does this mean? And the answers will lead to your understanding, right, of the product. And sometimes you're bringing value to your team, where you ask a fundamental question and they say, "We never thought of it that way."
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Play the newcomer card. That's a good one. How long, Ambika, would you play the newcomer card?
I think you can play the newcomer card comfortably almost for your first 90 days, depending on the situation. And then after that, you can't do that anymore. But and it also, if you're roped in, it gives you an opportunity to learn the technology stack and further your own education.
Yep, I think that's great. Jim, curious from your perspective as as a executive, you're often bringing on new people, and so what do you like to see from your perspective that people are learning, or the conversations that are happening, the knowledge share that's happening in the first 90 days? And maybe are there ways and bridges that newcomers can build with someone in your position without being afraid to talk to the co-founder or the CEO?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've often been in the position of being the first product manager for a product, and then I need to hand that off to a product manager or multiple product managers. And I usually like to put together information and artifacts that give the new person a voice of the customer. So give them a real feel for the customer problem that we're solving, because in my opinion, that is the number one thing for them to understand. At the same time, I think it's really important that the former PM doesn't pollute the new PM with their way of thinking, because it's possible that your way of thinking is maybe not wrong, but maybe it was thinking from the past based on some of your earliest learnings. And we always have that confirmation bias where we learn something new early on, it becomes our belief system, and then everything we do and hear reinforces that. And so the new product manager is in this outstanding position to come in and look at it with fresh eyes, and to look at the product with fresh eyes, listen to a customer conversation from the customer success team, or talk to a customer by themselves, and hear that problem firsthand. But at the early stages, I think the outgoing PM has a responsibility to, I guess, digest the customer problem for the new PM so they can get off on the right foot. So I usually put together artifacts such as records of conversations. If I've done validation on particular features of the product, I present all of that summary information to the PM, and then try to give them as much high-level information about the problem space, about the market, and so on, in order to get them off on the right foot.
That's great. Yeah, I think I've definitely seen that and fallen into that trap myself, where getting the biased opinion of the wrong individual has influenced or can influence someone else's decisions early on. And so I think that's a great kind of feedback, and ties into what Roxanne was saying at the beginning of your sphere of influence. Try not to limit who you're talking to a narrow view and open it up there. So we got a lot to cover, so I'm going to move us through the recap, but we kind of hit that first bullet there a bit here. So start with your sphere of influence, move out, write names down, follow up with those conversations, talk to everyone that you can. You do want to talk to sales, engineering, customer support, definitely talk to customers. It's up to you and kind of your responsibility to form your point of view here. So make sure you have as much information going into it as you can. Ambika, you mentioned it's great. Play the new card. Use that to your advantage. You're going to find yourself in conversations and topics that maybe you're not ready to have, but you can play new to allow you to dig into some of those things. And even when you know the answer, maybe you can play that card and have someone get a better understanding of their point of view without you dictating it. Closing those loops and creating artifacts for the next person all sound like great ideas. Anything big that we have missing here that you guys want to chat about real quick before we move on?
No.
Great. So moving on then to strategy. You got to be thinking about these kind of at the same time as everything is going. Strategy is really about getting an understanding of how things work before you come in and kind of lay down any strategy that you want to add. And so a question we got, and maybe Ambika, we'll start with you this time. What do you think are effective ways to determine how strategic decisions are made and priorities are set? Is it as simple as just coming in and saying, how does everything work here? Or do you think that there's other things that we can be doing to observe and learn and try to see, well, are things really working the way people say they are, before you come in and form your own point of view?
I mean, I think understanding how things work here is important, and also understanding, how did this product start? What was the history? What was the impetus for starting this product? What were the problems you were trying to solve? Understanding that history is equally important, and then observing for 3 weeks. If people say this is how we do things, is this the way they do things? Does it work well? Does it not work well? What are you seeing? And also trying to form your own point of view, right? Reading, doing a competitive analysis, seeing what else is out there in the market. How do other products approach the same problem? Looking at analyst reports, understanding their point of view. What's the state of the market? Doing all these things will help you kind of form your view on what the strategy is and should be.
Good. Roxanne, going back to the poll where it was highlighted that forming a roadmap was something that most people were interested or struggled with in their first 90 days. What are some of the things that you've done or would recommend folks are doing in those first 90 days as it comes to developing a strategy before putting together a roadmap?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation with these two things. Like, how do I learn the strategy recap, and then how might I inform the roadmap or create a roadmap? If you're a product owner whose sole responsibility is that, as designers, and the design philosophy I have is that we have a big voice in contributing to that strategy. So how might I do that? The challenge is similar to what Ambika was saying. There's really like a period of newness, and I really see the beginning of joining a new team as like sort of a fact-finding mission, where you really need to understand the team's tribal knowledge and the product's historic precedences. A lot of times when I join new teams, what I learn is that if I have sort of ideas at the get-go and I voice them, I often hear things like, we've already tried that, or that was something that was done. And what I did on the tracker team is I found an OG, someone who had a lot more of that domain and team understanding. And I asked them to sit with me and really tell me what that evolution, that product history was and that team history was. I needed to do that so that I could, that's one dimension of how I might contribute to the strategy. Is it a strategy that's been done before? Were there metrics tied to that? How did you define success? There was something I heard one time where I recommended an iteration for one of our teams in the tracker org. And what they said to me is, we tried this grid view already and we tested it and it failed. And they were already moving on from that to a whole new re-envisioning of something. And what I asked, I had to go back and ask, what was failure? How did you determine that? I had to like dig in a little bit, but always the sort of fact-finding missions and the discovery efforts to define strategy have to be from a very humble perspective. You're here to learn. You should have a curious mindset. If you're coming in sort of hard and fast and like, ready to shoot off directions and strategy without really being informed of what the team and the domain history is, you're not going to be kind of taken too seriously, or the idea is going to get lost in the ether and you'll never be able to build momentum on it. So to be able to inform product strategy is to first do your discovery. And as a new person, a new role, give yourself a time box, be aggressive, be curious. You play the new card as much as you can, milk it for all it's worth, ask those why questions and how did we know and what made us feel successful, and then feel out when is the right point to start informing on that product strategy.
That's a really tricky one, Roxanne. And I've always found that we can go to the person who has the most experience, and they in a sense can fast track our knowledge and history about the product. At the same time, they've been influenced over the years, and they might not be up to speed with the latest thinking or what the latest customer thinking is. And so how, as a new product manager, how do you separate that a little bit and be able to form your own opinion? I'm curious about that.
That's a great point, and it's a great caveat too, right? Just like when we do research, we're never weighing one set of customers' research too heavy unless they're our target customer, and we're always weighing the bias in, right? We should be doing the same thing on our teams. There may be one OG that has a lot of historical knowledge, but you're weighing that against other inputs into your discovery finding, even on your team. So for my use case, this OG happened to have a lot of that historical context, and I actually created a timeline with him. And then I looked to the stakeholders and just asked very specific questions based on that timeline to validate some of those things in the timeline. So this is sort of like a hard and fast way to get acclimated and onboarded really quickly. But since we're onboarding quickly, like you said, there's going to be a little gaps in our understanding, and there might be even bias. So we have to account for that in our feedback to our team.
Yeah, great points.
So Roxanne mentioned something, Jim, and it ties to a couple of questions that we've got before and during this conversation now, and that's around metrics. And so the idea of, getting someone to walk you through past decisions and getting that, deeper understanding, explanation of the data that's supported or defined was a success or failure, that's great. What about if there isn't someone to walk you through that? Do you have a sense of, what are the KPIs or the metrics that you would want someone digging into, you would dig into kind of in these first 90 days to help form a strategy?
Yeah, and of course it depends on the type of product that we're talking about. For this conversation, let's think about it as a software product or maybe a subscription software product, which I think a lot of us are involved in. Well, first of all, if there's no one there to walk you through the metrics, I think that's a red flag. If you can't find the person who's generating the data and is able to understand it, I think that might be a problem in itself. I also feel that product managers should be self-sufficient. They should be these, go-getters, and there are products out there that are generating this data. We use a variety of tools at Product Plan, for example, that generate the data that we create our KPIs from. And I would expect that if anyone new came in, that they would be able to get access to those systems and really dive in and understand the metrics. And then I think the new product manager needs to have a questioning mind about why are we collecting these metrics in the first place? I suspect that if those metrics have been collected for a very long time, and it's a larger organization, we tend to accumulate a lot of data that maybe doesn't really inform our decisions that well. There are some core metrics that perhaps a product manager should always know. Usage statistics, information about daily active users is a good one, right? So we want to have a good handle on those. But there are other metrics that maybe you're collecting that data because you've always collected that data. And I've counseled in the past to limit the areas, limit the number of data points that you're collecting, and focus on a handful of really key metrics that are indicative of whether that's moving the business forward to the goals that you've established for the product.
Great. Okay. Last question for the entire panel. Would be good to hear from everyone before we do a quick recap on strategy. Do you think 90 days is an appropriate amount of time to learn enough strategy and develop a roadmap?
I think it's plenty of time. And again, you can't let perfection be the enemy of good. You're supposed to be measuring and tracking yourself after the 90 days anyway, right? So to make sure that you can course correct. And if you follow like agile methodologies or iterative design methodologies or lean methodologies, you know that it's built into your process that you're going to be having a check. And if you're a collaborative team, you're going to have a lot of checks and balances. But I am a believer, surprised I'm a designer, so I believe in constraints, but I believe in time boxing because there is a little bit of grace under pressure. If you can time box some phases of your discovery effort so that you could get to a point where you could say, I'm going to try to map out a first version of a roadmap, or at least a short-term roadmap. It gets you in that mindset really quickly, and it also creates a little bit of validation with your team. Even if it's not perfect or if it's wrong, you can, or wrong being in quotes, what does wrong mean? You're still getting feedback from your team on your process and how you're thinking and absorbing. So it's sort of the output of all of your learning and understanding. And I think 90 days is plenty of time.
I think 90 days is plenty of time. I think something Roxanne said earlier, you get a really good idea of the trends. You might not have the hard data, but you understand the trends. You've talked to customers, you've talked to your people, so you understand the trends. And as a product manager, people are looking to you for leadership and providing direction. So it need not be perfect, but you have to provide direction. So I think 90 days is good to start.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you. I think 90 days is plenty of time, even if you lack domain expertise. I think that you can come in cold to a new vertical and get up to speed fairly, not 100%, of course, but you can get up to speed fairly quickly on the domain. And I'm also assuming in the scenario that you have some core product management skills, such as the ability to have a decision-making framework, a prioritization framework, at least in your head, and the way that you think about what the trade-offs are for different features, and those skills for being able to formulate the very basic roadmap, as Roxanne was saying.
Great, and that's a good segue into our next category here. But as a quick recap on things that we want to do with strategy, read, competitive analysis, any documentation, any historical decisions that were made about the roadmap. Do your best to get your hands on that stuff. Talk, as I think Roxanne mentioned, sit down with those people if you can. As Jim mentioned, be wary of the bias that they may bring, but you want to really try to understand as much of what is going on today. I think it's also, we didn't really talk about this, but I'll bring it up here in this second bullet. You really want to understand what's within your domain of accountability. Are you responsible for just building a roadmap against a pre-existing strategy? Are you the PM on an individual feature or on a product within a product suite? And do you own then the strategy for that? But having a better understanding of what you are accountable for is definitely going to help shape what your first 90 days look like. Dig into metrics, we've gone into that. And then buy yourself time by focusing on discovery first, right? And so I think that ties into 90 days is enough time. It's probably also potentially the minimum amount of time. And so if someone's coming in and saying, hey, we need strategy, your first 2 weeks on the job, try to buy yourself some time there and say, well, look, I got to learn about everything that's happened before. I need to learn about our market. I need to learn about what features we have. Do whatever you can to give yourself a little bit of breathing room so that you don't make a bad first impression by picking the wrong strategy out of the gate and then have to change course midway through. Okay, so let's jump in then to our final category before we open up for live Q&A. But we want to talk about tools and processes. And so Jim, at the end there, you were talking about frameworks, and I think that fits in a bit here with process. And so I'm interested, and maybe you can start, Jim, on what is the best way to evaluate existing process, specifically around frameworks. How are we making decisions, and with the potential of being someone who's in the position to change that process without angering a lot of folks. Any recommendations around that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'll say about frameworks and decision-making processes is that I believe that it's really essential for product managers to be transparent about their thought processes, about how they're arriving at decisions for what to build. Why is this on the roadmap? And being able to justify that. And then I think less importantly is the actual framework that you use for the decision-making process. I think most product managers think in terms of a quadrant of, value versus effort. I think those are some of the that's kind of the basic matrix that is in most product managers' heads around what do I build, A or B, right? So you're going to look at what the customer value is and versus the development effort at a very, very basic level. Of course, there are so many other considerations, competitive considerations, whether the feature is a delighter feature versus just a basic performance feature. There are different considerations, but at its most basic level, you have that quadrant in mind. And I think it's really important for a product manager to be able to talk with a stakeholder and justify why they're building something in the first place based on that framework, that thought process. And in order to get to that point, the product manager needs to have talked with a lot of stakeholders. They need to talk with executive management. They need to understand what the goals are for the company. They need to understand what the KPIs are. And then from there, you can develop the decision-making framework that helps you plan out what you're going to be building in the next couple of quarters. So that's the way that I think about it. So it's a lot of steps to get there, but at the baseline. The product manager needs to be able to explain their framework. Anyone disagree with that?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ambika.
No, the only thing I would add is, right, you need to be aware of, when you enter a new company, are they already using some kind of a framework? So when I worked at Steelcase, the big thing was they were using this framework called Where We Play and How We'll Win. So any decisions you came to, you had to frame in terms of that language and the design language they were using. And it's important to learn that in your first 90 days.
Yeah, hopefully you get a first impression of these things when you're interviewing for the new role. And I love the way you broke it down, Jim. I really agree with that. What I've noticed is that some folks talk about their process. Some organizations, part of their culture is to say, we're a lean startup, or we do Scrum. And they like to talk about their process. So you could start seeing the framework within these categories of how do you define value, how do you define effort, how do you define team collaboration. And so it fits nicely in these processes that are already defined. And some teams are they own that process. That's part of their culture. But oftentimes, or more oftentimes, that what I've learned is teams are more agnostic of the word process, but they're sort of more fluid in doing it. And if you're coming in sort of talking about, I do user-centered design, and user-centered design is my thing, and I want my product manager to also do user-centered design, you're coming in with a very set sort of methodology and imposing it on a team that may not even understand it yet. You may need to be an advocate for that process first before you start imposing it. So I really like this idea of dividing into how do you define value and how do you define effort, and a PM defining that for the team, it is sort of starts from there and it disseminates down. And I want to just break it down a little bit further, like asking a PM how you define value will reveal mountains of information. Is value driven by customer research? Is value driven by customer requirements? Is value driven by stakeholders? Is value driven by the business organizational goals disseminated down to you as a product manager who now needs to produce certain metrics for your product? And that will allow you to adapt to your team very quickly. And then just one thing about the how you define effort, another sort of revealing question too, and the way I'm learning and sort of absorbing is this PM or product owner defining effort as code, as developer effort? Is it by week? Is it by lines of code, which is kind of a red flag? Or are they defining effort as design effort? Or are they defining effort by research? That tells you a ton too. And hopefully, if you're in a healthy team, you're defining effort by all three things.
That's great. So we may have beaten to death the answer to my next question here, but I think the follow-up, or the other side of the coin with process and framework then is the tools in which you use to get it done. And so I'm curious if anyone has anything more to say about tools specifically in terms of, once you understand the framework and the process, is the tool you use in which to get it done, how important is that to you in your first 90 days, especially if you're coming in to a new company where maybe you were using tool, I'm going to try to avoid saying any of your competitor names here, but let's say you were using a different tool for writing tickets and doing ticket management, story management, and you are super familiar with Pivotal Tracker. What would be your thoughts on changing that or anything related to it?
I think there are two aspects, right? Your principles of product management remain the same, irrespective of which tools you use. So as long as the tools allow you to use that, you say, for the most part, you say, okay, one tool is almost similar to the other. I don't like tool A because it doesn't have these features. Tool B was better, but that constraints you operate under. But as long as you're following the principles and you're getting the outcomes you need, sometimes the tool doesn't matter. Sometimes you're just, it's efficiency and you have to introduce new tools. And, you just do that by, you just do and show. You don't talk about it too much. That's what I like to do. It's like, here is a new way of doing things. And people say, oh, how did you do that? And that sparks the conversation.
Yeah, it has to solve a problem. If you're going to be changing out tool sets, there has to be solving some underlying problem in the organization, either with communication or Team A doesn't know what Team B is doing. So if you do have those sorts of, especially communication issues, and teams aren't in alignment about what's happening, then you might consider switching out tools. But if there's no underlying problem that the team's bringing to your attention, I kind of would go with the flow on that and use whatever tool they're using.
I agree a lot with what you both said. I slightly disagree on one thing. You do need to go with the flow attitude and absorb the tools that your team is using. And I agree with Ambika, like the tools should be agnostic of how you work. The principles are really what matters. In my experience, the tools do indicate kind of how people work, and sometimes it can kind of be antithetical to how I work personally. And I'm going to do a shameless plug for Tracker. People who use Tracker do work in a certain way that I have more of an affinity for. It does tend to be a tool for like more autonomous teams and user-driven stories and things like that. I do see like our main competitors sort of moving in that space as well, but a team that uses a different workflow tool has different methodologies and philosophies. And it's not that their philosophies might not align with mine if they're not using a different tool. I'm just sort of like, to Jim's point and to Ambika's point, I'm going to go with the flow and try to see where our philosophies align, and then see if there's an opportunity for me to pitch a new tool. It's similar with like graphic interface tools. You tend to see like Adobe tools, especially like 5 years ago, more in waterfall agency type environments, because they are very robust and they go deep. And then you see things like Figma and Sketch in more iterative design agencies and work environments where work needs to sort of be produced quickly in pictures and visuals so that we could feed a team kind of on a regular short feedback loop and a regular basis. So the tools become reflections of how people work. And the challenge is, how do you incorporate a tool that you may not be accustomed to and sort of not rock the boat? But then, and I think the key again is not rocking the boat and finding your time to show the value of the tool that you might bring in by understanding how the current tool is serving the team currently.
Yeah, those are really great points. And I'll add one more thing, that if a company is hiring product managers, the company's growing, right? And the company and the way that the teams operate probably will be changing as well. So those team dynamics will be changing. That might necessitate a tooling change. It might necessitate moving from spreadsheets into Tracker, or moving the roadmap from a spreadsheet into a product roadmap solution. So as the team is growing, if we're hiring product managers, we may need to change our tooling along the way.
Awesome. All right, a quick few bullets. I don't know where quickle came from. A couple of these we didn't talk about, and so I want to make sure we highlight them. One is making sure you get on the right email lists, get in the right meetings as soon as possible. You don't want to go too long without being in those conversations. So that's a good one about process. We talked about that second bullet there about jobs to be done before selecting the right tool. I think another important thing tied to tool, this is one I'm currently experiencing myself, is know what tools you're accountable for. Because when the budget comes due, you'll definitely find out then. And so if you have a tool in your team's use and it costs a lot of money and it's not getting the return on investment back to the organization, those questions may come to you. So you want to know what tools are mine to own, and is this the right tool? Are we using it the right way? And what do we need to do to set it up correctly if we're not? And then another good one about process is once you start digging into the backlog and have an understanding of how a team is working through stuff, really try to understand how stale is the backlog that you may have inherited. And I think we've all gone through this problem where the right answer, as painful as it may often seem, is truly just throw things away that are, pick a period of time, throw them away. If they're important, they'll come back, trust me. I know it's a very scary thing, but they always come back. All right, we're running out of time. We have so many awesome questions, so we're gonna try to do these rapid fire. Like I mentioned, we can follow up more on Slack or through our newsletter. But the first question I'm gonna throw to Jim, because we got it from two different folks, two different ways. One from the perspective of the PM and one from the perspective of their manager or leader. What KPIs should you be measuring to define your success in these first 90 days? So not looking at KPIs for the product, but what makes your first 90 days good? What should you be measuring, or what do you measure about a new hire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that showing that you can talk credibly with customers, I think that's a really important one. If I were watching a new product manager, I would listen to the questions that they're asking. I would hope that they would be continuing to learn and iterate along the way. In terms of actual output, I don't know if there's any one single KPI I would be looking at to measure that output. But I would hope that they would be formulating an opinion over time. After the first 30 days, I would be listening to their questions and seeing if that opinion is evolving.
Great. Okay. This one we'll send to Roxanne. How do you go about getting the information you need from a new team when they're not maybe forthcoming with the information?
That's a great question. Kevin, let me take this chance to clarify two quick terms. I said OG, that's just New York for original. And when I go to an OG, I talk to an original member of the team. Sorry, I'm from New York and it's pretty common here. And your question was, who do you talk to when your team isn't forthcoming? There's a wonderful resource of your support tickets or your support team to understand where the customers are with your product. And if you don't have a support team that's available to you, kind of along the lines of where the core essence of the question, you can still dive into your support tickets and really understand what the state of your customers are. And then again, there's your backlog. Being an expert in your current backlog in its current state as a PM is very important. The backlog is yours. That's your domain. So really understanding the backlog, looking at the stories that were accepted in the past before you, looking at the milestones that you hit, looking at how releases are packaged, how the different environments are set up, gives you a really good lay of the land. And hopefully, again, you were onboarded with someone who was giving you their sort of passing the baton. But if you're not, just really diving into those tickets or stories, seeing how they were accepted, seeing the conversation logs of how people are interacting with the teams. And if you're lucky to have retrospectives are a great place to see and understand how the team is feeling. That's on the morale bucket and the feelings bucket. How's the team doing? And I make it a point to not rock the boat again too much as a new member of a team in retros. I'm more of a listening agent than I am of a giving agent. And hopefully those things will help you get onboarded to the team.
Great. Awesome.
The
Thanks.
only thing I'll add there, Roxanne, is it's also good to follow the communication channels, right? It's like your Jira, this thing, follow the Slack threads. You start getting an idea of what is actually happening.
That's true. That's a great point.
And that's going to lead me to the final question that we're at like a minute left here. And so I'll ask the entire panel, but Amvika, we'll start with you so you're not shorted on a quick Q&A here. Does any of this change with the current shelter in place? Lives we're all leading here. Anything about the topics we talked about? Any of the strategies and roadmap? Can you think of anything that becomes more difficult given the current situation?
I think fundamentally they're all going to be the same. You're forming your relationships online rather than in person. You should be aware you're going to kind of miss out on the group dynamics of people together in a room or people together in a meeting. So you need to, I think, go the extra mile in reaching out and forming those relationships, which will be crucial for your success.
Great. Anyone else has?
I would agree. I would agree with you, Ambika. It's the fundamentals are the same. A product manager is a communicator, and I think that the communication needs to probably increase even more. Both listening and communicating outward and upward needs to increase even more in this time of distance work.
Great. Roxanne, anything?
Nothing to add. That was very well said.
Great. All right. Well, we hit our time. Thank you to the panel. All fantastic insights and ideas and conversation. Glad to have you all here. Thank you to all of our attendees. Looks like we capped out around close to 450 maybe of you all. We always run out of time on these things. Feel free to join more of the conversation at theproductstack.com. You'll find a link to our Slack channel. You'll also find a link to subscribe to our newsletter, which is theproductstack.substack.com. And we do have we meaning product plan in this case. They have a couple blog posts about some of this already. So you can find those two links here. We'll make sure we post those in Slack as well, so you don't have to type these out. Appreciate everyone joining. There will be a follow-up email that contains a link to the video once this is all finished. And we look forward to hearing and seeing you all again another time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.